My name is Margaret Ottaway, and I have lived in Louth in Lincolnshire for all my life except 1 year when I lived in Alford. I'm 81 years old in June 2014. I come from a family of 7 children, and my parents' background was Grimsby. And my dad came over to Louth in the 1920s. My father was one of a very big family in Grimsby and could not read or write when he left school, and he started to work, and for however it all appeared I don't know, but he ended up being a haulage contractor, and the first lorry had solid tyres, so you know how long ago that was. And he moved to Louth. I don't know why they moved to Louth, but we lived on the top of Grimsby Road on the hill. I was the sixth child out of 7. Mother lost 2 boys before I was born, and so I really only know my elder brother, who was Len, and my sister Dorothy, and I have a brother who still lives in Louth, who's called John, and then there was me, and then there was a Down syndrome daughter, age 5. We were very, very integrated with the community because my father at that stage employed, had 30 lorries, so he employed 30 men, plus some of the mates, which were the lorry drivers' mates. And he was a haulage contractor that carried fish from Grimsby docks. He also had to go on the farms, or his lorries did, to get the corn in. We were also a big family. There were aunties and uncles that lived in the town at that time, all with a fair number of families. And so I've never felt ever to be alone. It's just amazing. Anyway, I went to a primary school in Louth called Kidgate School, and for some reason I didn't settle, so I went to another school called Eastfield Road School in Louth. And I can remember as before I was 7, cycling to Grimsby with one of my older cousins, and ended up at my granny's on the Scatha Road in Grimsby, and my cousin would be probably about 9 or 10. And I was in big trouble when I got home on the bus. My granny was furious with me, and my parents would be as well. As I say, our family, extended family, spent a lot of time over in our house, and on a Sunday, September the 7th, 1941, the family from Grimsby had contacted my mother and father to say they were coming over for tea. In the household, in the top of Louth, it was a semi-detached house, there was an air raid shelter, but we'd apparently had tea. I can't remember these things, but we had tea, and then the 3 children, that's myself, who was 7, and my cousin Jeannie, and obviously my 5-year-old sister, we were all put to bed downstairs in the front room. That's what you did. My brother John, who was 13 at the time, was still upstairs. There were too many of us in the house, I assume, not to go into the air raid shelter, because I can remember my dad taking my sister Mary and I to show us in the air raid shelter, and I can remember distinctly a little wooden cupboard which had emergency rations in, and that cupboard survived the war because I used it during my life, and I just feel sad that because there were too many people, and you wouldn't pick out a few children and put them in there on their own in the middle of the night. My auntie and my uncle, etc., they were going to go home, and during the evening, and I'm not quite sure what time, the siren went. So of course everybody battened down the hatches. My family friend was actually on duty in the warden's office in the town, and he knew what time the bomb dropped. They knew that there were 2 bombs that dropped, and they knew eventually it was on the Grimsby Road. I have written evidence of that, a copy of that, and then they realised it was at Arthur Jane's house, and they offered condolences to the tragic loss for Special Constable Arthur Janes and fellow warden Dorothy Janes for their losses. My father, I'm told, wanted to go up Grimsby Road, but the others in the different teams, because what people must understand, it was the second incident for civilians, when civilians were killed in the town, both in 1941. My recollection of it is that I was trapped in rubble, and I woke up. I couldn't think what had happened to me at the top of Grimsby Road, number 34 it was, Mayfair it was called, because my mum's name was May, and I really couldn't understand what had happened to me. And I can remember hearing a pneumatic drill, and I can remember I couldn't move because of the gravel. I could feel the gravel around me all over. So I don't know how deep I was buried, but I suspect it must have been with the collapse of the building, because I have a picture of the building after this happened, but I think they would probably take away the excess rubble, because according to what I understand, my brother was upstairs and I suspect the floor would give way, because it was a high velocity bomb in the front of the back of the house, the side door, and then the other bomb dropped in the field, which was Howard's farm. They were both at the, jettisoned, well, not at the same time probably, but within seconds. So my brother does recall that, and he was taken to, I don't know what it's called, but the Red Cross ran these places where you were sent. I've never actually found out where it was, but I think it could have been in Merceau, opposite the King's Head in Louth. But I can remember being taken in there, and I can't remember how I got from the house down to the place, but I can remember being fed with like a teapot without a lid, of which I've got copies of at my home. And I can always remember the atmosphere when a stretcher was carried through, and I'm convinced, because of the atmosphere, that was our mother. But of course, it's after the event that you feel these things, but I can definitely remember that. Now, what happened to me after that was that because I had an uncle and an aunt in the town, Dolly and Bill Janes, I was taken up to Brackenborough Road in Louth, and I got into bed with my cousin June Janes, and she told me on a regular basis that when I got into the bed with her, it was like biscuit crumbs in the bed, and when I went to spend a penny at the lavatory, you could hear the gravel dropping out of my trousers onto the lino, because it was all lino then. From then on, I was sent to a family friend the next day, and that was Mr. and Mrs. John Clark, and they lived at Withgall. They were family friends, and I knew of them, and I lived with them for 3 months, and it was a farm, and I was there obviously when the funerals occurred, and of course I had no idea, and I don't actually know how I know that this all had happened to me. I recall that Mr. Clark, see, my memory is that Mr. Clark told me on a particular day that it was the funeral of those that were killed. So there was, to go back to who was killed, our mother, who was 47, her mother, our Granny Ward, who was from Grimsby, she was 70. Our Down syndrome sister, who we didn't know she was a Down syndrome until 1972 it would be about, because nobody told you those things then. And she was killed. Jeannie was killed, our cousin from Grimsby. Her dad was killed, Walt, and his brother, I think was called Ronald, he was killed.